hands, so I'll try my best. I'm feeling a little Twitter-pated right now. We just sang that song. Was that song beautiful? Washed in the blood. So we just found out, I'm just going to say that somebody that we love very much has gotten saved. I'm ready for the word. I'm ready for the music. I'm ready to sing, seriously, so I'll try to keep it together, but I'm feeling almost short of breath. Anyways, so I'm going to talk to you about the bread of life. So I hope you will find this message encouraging and enlightening. It is a subject that I am very passionate about, and I'm happy to be able to share with all of you. You may find that what I'm about to share is a little different than the rest of the sessions here this weekend. It's something maybe a little unique for what we do here, but I do hope you find it informative. Jesus declared, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." Jesus had just provided a miracle feast for more than 5,000 people by multiplying 5 loaves and 2 fish. And the people followed after him, hoping for more bread. In the first of 7 I am statements in John's gospel account, Jesus says, "I am the bread of life." Notice, Jesus didn't say, "I am the vegetables of life," or the fruit of life, or even the grass-fed beef of life. I think that Jesus chose the metaphor of bread very intentionally. The picture of Jesus as the bread of life is pictured in the Old Testament as well. The Jews that listened to Jesus touched on one example. In John 6:31, they said, "Our forefathers ate the manna in the desert, as it is written, 'He gave them bread from heaven to eat.' Jesus said to them, 'I tell you the truth. It is not Moses who has given you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." In the Old Testament, God fed the children of Israel with a type of bread as they went through the wilderness on their way to the Promised Land. It was called manna, and it pictured in a small way the true bread that was coming. The concept of bread as a symbol of sustenance and nourishment is prevalent throughout the Bible. In Genesis 3:19, God tells Adam that he will eat bread by the sweat of his brow after leaving Eden as a part of his journey. Later on, God provided that manna for the Israelites. It was a sign of God's provision and his care for the people, delivering a message of hope to them. The Israelites were instructed to gather just enough manna for their daily needs because God would provide fresh manna each morning. Jesus uses bread as a metaphor for his body, which he offers as a sacrifice for the salvation of humanity. Jesus spoke, "This is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." This act symbolizes how Jesus' body was broken on behalf of all humanity, so that they could be saved from sin as part of God's plan. Furthermore, we partake in communion to remember what God did for us through Christ on Calvary by taking bread and wine that represent his body and his blood. A modern person today, looking at these metaphors that Jesus used about bread, could see it entirely differently than the original audience of ancient people would have. If you look around in our culture today, or you spend any time on the internet, you will quickly see that bread is being absolutely vilified. Okay. How have we moved from the bread of life to your bread is killing you. How have we got there? What has happened to our bread that it has taken us from something that Jesus compared himself to that gives us life to something that takes life? Wheat is the most nutrient-dense food that God has given us. How did we get to a place where eating that bread could make us sick? For anyone, I don't know if there's anyone here who hasn't been here before or who doesn't know me. I know Jen introduced us a little bit earlier, but my name is Tanya Baltzer. My husband and I live locally, and we have 5 children. And I have 1 grandson. One of those 5 children, our middle child, started having health problems when he was quite young. He had a variety of autoimmune issues, including alopecia, a condition where your hair falls out in patches, frequent, extremely high fevers. We were one time put in the IWK's infectious disease unit because his body was attacking his liver. By the time he was 13, he was diagnosed with arthritis, and he had chronic pain in his wrists and his ankles and his back, to the point that it was affecting his ability to play and be a regular 13-year-old boy. There'd be running games going on, and he would just sit down, and his ankles would be in so much pain. And I specifically remember the day that he was almost in tears trying to mash strawberries in the kitchen from his wrists hurting so bad. He was also very tiny, and he wasn't growing well. And he would at times have debilitating migraine headaches. We had a very kind pediatrician. He worked with us, and he really couldn't figure out why any of this stuff was happening. He had undergone so many tests, my son did, so much blood work, that when we would walk into the hospital, he would just claw and scream to get out. At this time, we didn't know anything about wheat intolerance, and the gluten-free movement that we hear so much about today was really just in its early stages. But after some research, I decided to take him off of all wheat. I discussed this with our pediatrician, and he honestly acknowledged to me that he didn't know much about this, that he hadn't been taught very much about diet-related issues in school. He thought if I wanted to try it, go ahead. So what we saw in a short period of time was quite remarkable. Within weeks, literal weeks, the chronic pain that had been plaguing him for years was gone. It was probably 3 to 4 weeks, and it was completely gone. He had a tremendous growth spurt, and his health literally turned around. Our frequent trips to the doctor's office stopped entirely. I was definitely on to something, I thought, but after having him on a gluten-free diet for a number of months, I began to feel uneasy about his gluten-free diet. Now that he was off wheat, he was eating a lot of nutritionally empty starch products. Gluten-free does not mean healthy, right? If you look at the ingredients on the leading gluten-free flour, you will see ingredients like white rice flour, potato starch, tapioca starch. I started to seek the Lord and do some research. Actually, I started to do a lot of research. And what you're going to hear now is the byproduct of many years of that research. I realized that the wheat itself wasn't the problem, and I was able to successfully get him back on a healthy diet of ancient whole grains, and we continued to see even more remarkable improvements in his health. Right now, we live in one of the wealthiest nations in the world, yet we are also one of the sickest nations in the world. And this really includes all of North America. We are sick, sick, sick. Our medical system is very good at treating symptoms and not the root of the problem. I am confident that everyone in this room knows people facing health issues. We are a nation of people dealing with constipation. See, I'm going to say that kind of word. It's a little different. But constipation, congestion, ear infections, stomach problems, and we are sick with viruses all the time. North America today is living off of antihistamines, decongestants, laxatives, and PPIs, which are proton pump inhibitors. They are one of the most frequently prescribed drugs in our country. I could probably do a whole session on PPIs and how they affect your body's ability to absorb nutrients. Manufacturers of these drugs state you should not be on them longer than 6 weeks, and today it is very common to see people on them indefinitely. And I've had my own personal experience with them. I had a pharmacist once tell me they're harder to get off than crack cocaine. They are. Well, actually, I haven't tried to get off crack cocaine, just to clarify that. But I've had to get off PPIs, and it was awful. So I encourage you, if you're on them, to take some time and do a little research on that. Antibiotics. They are destroying our gut bacteria. I'm thankful for them when we need them, but they wreak havoc on our gut bacteria. And every time you take ibuprofen, your intestines bleed. Every time. Carrageenan, a cause of leaky gut, is in almost all of our store-bought dairy products. Everywhere I turn, people are telling me they are gluten-free. But is gluten really responsible for all the health problems we are having? Is gluten really the evil nemesis it is made out to be? And why is this gluten intolerance a predominantly Western phenomenon? So, like I said before, grains are the most nutrient-rich source of food that God has given to us. It seriously breaks my heart every time I hear someone tell me they've gone on a gluten-free diet. I want to cry, because I know that they are exchanging the most glorious, amazing superfood that God has given us for an empty, starch-filled diet full of things like rice flour and tapioca starch that can nowhere compare to the nutritional value that God has given in a grain of wheat. Now, disclaimer, I want to say up front, I understand. There are people out there who are celiac. Celiac is a real thing. I get that, I understand, but I also know that celiac is rare. 0.06% of the North American population are affected by celiac disease. That's the same percentage of people that are affected with a peanut allergy. Food allergies are a real thing, and for those that have them, they need to avoid those foods. If you are celiac, you can look for God's whole gluten-free grains such as millet, amaranth, and sorghum. But the vast majority of people are not celiac, but what is more commonly known as wheat or gluten intolerant. What I found with our son, and many people are finding, is that they are truly processed flour intolerant. They stop eating the processed wheat products they find in the grocery store, and they feel better. Gluten or wheat sensitivity can happen also because of drugs, such as antibiotics or those anti-inflammatories like ibuprofen or your acid blockers. For many with those kind of sensitivities, it is possible to prevent, correct, and even reverse these conditions by healing your gut. So gluten is an elastic network of proteins created when flour is mixed with water. So gluten is not in a kernel of wheat. If I show you wheat kernels right now, if there's not gluten, there's a protein in that wheat that when mixed with water creates gluten. It is responsible for the structure and texture in your breads. It has been with us since time began. Genesis, y'all. And I think you will see that it is not the evil monster that it's been made out to be. Now, as I said a minute ago, grains are the most nutrient-rich source of food that God has given us. Ounce for ounce, and the grain of wheat has more nutritional value than any other food there is. Any other food there is. The human being needs 44 essential nutrients for life, and grain contains 40 of them. Of those, the others being vitamin A, okay, that's your orange vegetables. Vitamin C, your citrus fruits, berries. Vitamin D, sunshine. And the amino acid lysine, which is found in beans. All other 40 essential nutrients that you need for life are found in a single grain of wheat. One of those essential nutrients that we all need is vitamin E. And I just want to park on vitamin E for just a minute. Grain is the richest food source of vitamin E that we have. Vitamin E protects the integrity of every cell in your body. If your cell membrane is weak, it is more likely to be susceptible to being invaded by viruses. Viruses, unlike bacteria, have to come into your cells to reproduce. Bacteria can reproduce on its own. Constant invasions of viruses is why we stay so sick with colds and flu. Vitamin E also helps to strengthen the heart muscles as well as the capillaries, and its action in preventing the formation of blood clots has been well established. Canadian doctors Evan and Wilfred Shute were the first medical doctors to realize that adequate vitamin E is vital to heart health. Also, just quickly here, I have to mention warts. Anyone has a problem with warts or kids having problems with warts? Vitamin E. Vitamin E is essential. Warts going away is one of the more frequent testimonies that many people have after switching to home-milled grains. And that is entirely related to vitamin E consumption. So ounce for ounce, pound for pound, grains are the most nutrient-rich source of food. So eat your fruits, eat your vegetables, they're delicious, God gave them to you, but don't leave out your grains. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 11, it says, "And God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed and fruit trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good." And if we go down to verse 29, it says, "And behold, God said, I give you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in it, seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food." So let's think about that for a minute. He gave us fruits and vegetables, and he also gave us the seed of the plant. There's a very significant reason God did that. What happens to fruits and vegetables over time? They go bad, they rot. Right? It doesn't take very long. Every day that you're storing them in the refrigerator, or they're hanging out on a tree ripening, there's a peak of nutritional value, and then they start losing. Not so with your seeds. Grains and beans are the seed of the plant. Okay. Video here. You see that when God made the seed, he put around the outside of the seed the bran. Now, this bran protects the integrity of the seed. The bran is the outermost layer of the seed. It is several layers thick, and it is a waxy coating. It makes up 14 to 16% of the dry weight of the kernel, and it is a rich supply of vitamins, iron, trace minerals, as well as soluble and insoluble fiber. It is a good source of protein and provides enzymes that aid in the digestion of the other grain's components. The germ of the seed, that little yellow part down there, this is where the sprout is going to come from. This is also where the vitamin E lives, as well as the fatty acids. Although it makes up only 4 to 5% of the weight of the grain, it contains many antioxidants and minerals, most of the B vitamins, and numerous phytonutrients, making it a nutritional powerhouse. Everything else out there, all that other white stuff there, the endosperm, that is little packets of protein and starch. Okay, this is where we get our white flour. While the endosperm does provide some amino acids, it is virtually devoid of any vitamins and minerals. So left whole and intact, the seeds are storable, right? If God didn't create them that way, we wouldn't have next year's crop. They will be just as nutritious today as they will be next week, next month, next year, even 3,000 or 4,000 years from now, as long as they're kept whole, intact, and dry. In fact, there are tombs in ancient Egypt that were discovered with grain believed to be 3,000 to 4,000 years old, and they planted it and it grew. So whole, dry, and intact is the way you store your grains. So I store my grains in my pantry upstairs. So just quickly, these are buckets with gamma seals. They make easy access for airtight bins, and I also have grains stored in my basement inside Mylar bags, which are sealed and placed in 5-gallon buckets just to keep the rodents out. But grains are storable. We see that in the story of Joseph. The Bible tells us how Joseph stored grain during 7 fat years in preparation for 7 lean. Through his prudence, Joseph was able to feed not just Egypt, but the surrounding nations as well. So having food to share with your family and community in a time of need can also be a relief. Now, it's important to understand that once the grain is cracked, all the vitamins and minerals and the oils are exposed to air. And the process of oxidization begins immediately. If you cut an apple, you know that it doesn't have to sit on your counter very long and it's going to start turning dark and brown. This is oxidization. Okay? It breaks down the nutrients. So even if you're buying your flour stone ground, okay, there are places like Spearville Flour Mill. I know some of you order. I have a wholesale buying group with Spearville. You order their flour. They stone grind their flour, whole kernel. But in the first 24 hours, the flour loses 45% of its vitamins and minerals. And within 3 days, it loses 90%. And the vitamin E is the first to go. Vitamin E is an antioxidant. Antioxidant. We just talked about oxidization, right? So antioxidant, what it actually means is that nutrient protects other nutrients from being destroyed in the presence of oxygen. It's like the front line of the troops, okay, in the military. What is the front line doing? It's protecting all the guys behind him, right? He's the first to go, the front line. So now we are going to look at the history a little bit of what we're eating as flour today. So prior to the 1900s, bread baked at home was milled at home or at a local miller's. In fact, towns built up around local mills. As wind power and water power advanced, families no longer had to mill wheat at home, and millers became key figures in the community. But in the late 1800s, it was discovered if we sift this nutrient-rich bran away and the oil-laden germ, and leave only the protein and starch, the flour won't spoil. This led to the invention of the steel roller mill. These changed the commercial flour milling industry forever, and these new mills, which used metal rollers instead of millstones, were less expensive to operate. They produced more flour per pound, and they sift away nearly every trace of bran and germ, including all the oil that causes spoilage. Massive amounts of long-lasting white flour could now be cheaply produced. What was once reserved for the wealthy now became affordable for everybody, to the rich and the poor alike. Wonderful, fluffy, white flour. No, anyone that knows me, knows I have quite a passion for ancient history. White flour has always been around, so this is not something new. Back in the days of the Romans, they figured out sifting the coarse bran and germ out. But this was something reserved only for the very wealthy. First, this was time-consuming. And secondly, it resulted in the loss of approximately 25% of your grain. You had to have servants to be able to do it, and you had to be able to afford to part with 25% of your grain. Most of the poor plebeian Roman people could not afford that. In ancient Rome, the status of your family was actually based on how white your bread was. Proverbs 23 says, "When you sit down to eat with a ruler, observe carefully what is before you, and put a knife to your throat if you are given to appetite. Do not desire his dainties and delicacies, for they are deceptive food." These dainties and delicacies were probably the sifted white flour pastries of the rich and the kings. So now in the early 1900s, white flour is broadly available, rich or poor. It is now the food of choice among the general population. So what happens? 3 diseases now begin to rise in epidemic proportions. The first is beriberi. Sometimes these are collectively known as the white bread disease. Beriberi, this disease, was virtually unheard of in North America until 1907. It is a thiamine vitamin B1 deficiency disease that results in neurological disorders. Pellagra. The first case of pellagra was diagnosed in 1902 and is caused by niacin vitamin B3 deficiency. Pellagra is also known as the disease of the 4 Ds: dysentery, dermatitis, dementia, and death. Dysentery is a gastrointestinal disturbance. Dermatitis is responsible for skin eruptions. Dementia is a mental illness and ultimately death. By 1920, pellagra had reached epidemic proportions with a mortality rate of 40%. Anemia, an iron deficiency disease that causes extreme tiredness and weakness. Health officials worked tirelessly to discover why the incidence of these diseases were rising so dramatically. Eventually, the problem was traced to an increased consumption of predominantly white flour. The millers were urged to correct the nutritional deficiencies in the flour, but no, they were completely unwilling to do this because, as it turns out, they were selling all the good stuff they're taking out of your flour to the animal feed industry. And this is what's still happening today, and it is very lucrative. So they didn't want to do that. So this resulted in the early 1940s in the government stepping in to mandate the enrichment of your flour products. They mandated adding back in 4 nutrients: 3 B vitamins and iron. That hardly seems like a good trade. They're removing 40 and they're adding back 4. And in 1998, they stepped in again to mandate the addition of another nutrient, folic acid, another crucial B vitamin lost in the milling process. This was done after seeing 50 years of increased birth defects. So the word enriched. The dictionary gives the definition of enriched as to improve or enhance the quality or value of. It gives us the sense that they're making something better. When you see the word enriched on the flour package, you are not getting something made better. but something so far less than what God intended. Now, the enrichment of commercially milled flour supposedly ended these epidemics. But as more and more nutritional deficient, commercially processed foods are consumed on a daily basis, maybe we should be asking questions. Maybe we should ask how many people suffer from neurological disorders, bowel disturbances, skin eruptions, or mental instability. Obesity is now a major health concern. Type 2 diabetes has reached alarming levels, especially in children. Constipation, there's that word again. It's no longer an old person's problem. It is something that now affects old and young alike. Folks, going to the washroom once every couple days is not normal. It's not normal. There was an African man who was speaking at my previous church a number of years ago, and I don't remember what he was talking at church. I don't remember what the message was on or how this came into it, but he gave this proverb. He said where he's from in Africa, they have this proverb: big stool, small hospital. Small stool, big hospital. Guess what we have? Big hospitals. There is even now a constipation clinic in Kentville for children. Quite a number of years ago, when one of our children actually was struggling with chest pain, the first response of our doctor for our 8-year-old was PPIs for heartburn. Didn't know any better. Gave her PPIs. They didn't improve anything, and we ended up back in Emerge, and it showed she was backed up from one end to the other, completely constipated. Sorry, if any of you read Joel Salatin's books, I have to keep quoting him with, folks, this just ain't normal. It's not normal. If you eat 3 times a day, you should be going to the bathroom 3 times a day. We got a dog a year ago, and we knew when the dog ate, a half an hour later, you take the dog outdoors. This is natural. This is how it works. So, what has been done to God's perfect provision? And if that were not enough, residual oils turn yellow with oxidization. What was their solution to that? Let's bleach the flour. If you take a bag of Robin Hood flour from any local store and you look at the ingredients, the second ingredient is going to be benzoyl peroxide. Okay? If you ever had acne, you might know what benzoyl peroxide is. Benzoyl peroxide must be neutralized by adding substances such as calcium carbonate, calcium sulfate, dicalcium phosphate, or sodium aluminum sulfate. Benzoyl peroxide has been linked to respiratory problems. Potassium bromate is another agent that can be used in your commercial white flour. It strengthens the gluten structure, which allows for better rise in your bread. But it's been linked to liver, thyroid issues, and cancer. Nitrogen trichloride was one of the first chemical bleaching agents used by commercial millers for 40 years, but then was taken off the market after they realized it was causing seizures and hysteria. Now, what about whole wheat or whole grain products in the store? Can I just switch to them? To produce the whole wheat flour, most commercial millers follow the exact same process for making refined white flour. They remove the bran and germ portions. They return a very small amount of the bran according to a legal standard. It's white flour with a little bran sprinkled back in. Adding these components back into a bland-tasting white flour might improve its fiber content, but they have now deteriorated, adding a bitter, almost rancid flavor to the products. Fresh milled flour does not taste like anything that you've ever tasted from the store. You know, when you're trying to cook with whole wheat flour and your bread is like a rock and your cookies and everything is really dense and really heavy, fresh wheat milled flour, nothing like that. You ate it tonight in the burger buns. All the cookies that we served were all made with fresh whole milled flour. Completely different product. 100% whole grain, commercially ground flour gives your baked goods a dry, bitter flavor. The oils which are removed to prevent spoilage are never returned to commercially made whole wheat flour. Statistics show that homegrown flour is far superior nutritionally to commercially milled whole wheat flour. According to the USDA nutrient database, when they compared commercially processed whole wheat flour to freshly ground hard red wheat, the hard red wheat that was freshly ground had twice the calcium and phosphorus, twice the crucial B vitamins, nearly twice the riboflavin, 3 times the iron, 4 times the potassium. Another interesting study to note was done in Germany. And in this study, rats were fed diets consisting of 50% flour or bread. So group 1 consumed freshly ground flour. Group 2 was fed bread from freshly ground flour. Group 3 consumed the same flour as Group 1, but after it had been stored for 15 days. Group 4 was fed bread made from flour that was stored for 15 days. And Group 5 was fed white flour. After 4 generations, only the rats from Group 1 and 2 that were fed the freshly ground flour or bread made from the freshly ground flour maintained their fertility. All other groups were sterile. 4 generations of rats is believed to be the equivalent of 100 years for humans. Proverbs 14:12 says, "There is a way that seems right unto a man, but the end thereof is death." A close look reveals that it is not whole grains that are bad, but the processing that they have been subjected to for convenience and profit. The days when whole grains were associated with good health are under attack. Throughout history, bread has been the staff of life. It is only in more recent years that bread took on a more accompaniment role at meals. It was a main staple. It's time to return to whole grains, not the highly processed grains and their products found in the stores, but real, healthy, whole, freshly milled grains. There are many to choose from. There are a multitude of varieties of wheat, from the oldest known ancient grain einkorn, which is the mother of all wheat varieties, to our modern hard and soft wheat kernels. Home flour milling gives you opportunity to explore so many different kinds of grains. By experimenting with grains, you can create distinct flavors, textures, products, producing entirely different results from the same recipe. By varying flours, you can create unique breads and a variety of other baked goods. So I hope and I pray that your family will consider beginning the adventure of milling your own flours at home. Just a couple things. Wrong way. Where am I going? Where am I going? There's not all my pictures there. Is that all the ones that are up there? Yeah. Okay. Oh, that's my mill. That's my mill. Yeah, because no, I'm still missing there. Okay, that's the one I wanted. Back. There you go. This is what I've got in my backyard. I was just going to tell you all that, but you saw my mill, so now you know I was be fibbing. I was going to say, this is my donkey, Charlie. No, really, seriously. I'm all over the place, and now I knocked it off the computer. Okay, I don't know if you can put that back up, but mills don't look like that today. You saw mine. It sits on my counter. It's right there when I need it. The grain goes in, the grain comes out, and I bake with it. It's very simple process. I know that you have, Shannon had shared a little bit earlier of a bit about her testimony and how it's affected her changing over to whole milled grains. There are a number of women here in the church that all have amazing stories. So if you have started milling your own grains, can you raise your hand? Okay. Can you look around? If you have any questions, you need to talk to any of these ladies. I know I'm to point out, but even Rachel's husband, I couldn't eat gluten at all. So there's some great stories out there. Talk to these ladies and find out how this has changed them, their families, their lives, and and ask them questions, ask me questions. But anyway, yeah, so that's everything.
Thanks, Tanya.